The Battle of San Jacinto, the most important battle you have never heard of. General Sam Houston played a very important role and left a vital legacy in the history of Texas and the United States. With Houston's leadership, his ragtag citizen volunteers fought and defeated dictator of Mexico Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna and his well-trained and more experienced army at the Battle of San Jacinto. This battle gave Texas its independence from Mexico and eventually led to Texas and several other states becoming part of the Union. Despite the importance of this battle in the history of Texas and the U.S., it is little known. On April 19, 1836, 2 days before the battle, the Mexican army led by Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna set up camp in a marshy area in what is now Harris County, Texas. Sam Houston camped his army very close to Santa Anna's near the San Jacinto River Buffalo Bayou and a small lake. The next day, Sam Houston and his army were preparing for a surprise attack against the much larger and more experienced Mexican force. The rebellious Texas army consisted of approximately 800 to 900 volunteers, while the Mexican army had between 1,400 and 1,500 trained soldiers. Houston had a plan. He knew that if he waited until the afternoon to attack, the Mexicans would not be prepared for a brawl. He was going to use the element of surprise. Just as Sam Houston suspected, the Mexicans were resting, assuming that since he did not attack at first light, he was not going to attack on that day. Santa Anna was possibly the most surprised of the Mexican army while he was with a prostitute in his tent when the Texians attacked. What sequence of events led to the eve of this momentous battle? To answer this question, we need to flash back 300 years. In November of 1528, Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca and 3 other Spanish explorers were the first Europeans to come to Texas. Nearly 200 years later, the first known Spanish missions were constructed for the purpose of converting the Indians to the Roman Catholic religion and to establish a Spanish presence in this new land. The first mission in Texas was called San Antonio de Valero, later and more popularly known as the Alamo, which would later become the site of the famous battle. After the Alamo was built, 25 other missions followed up until 1731. Missionaries wanted to convert the New Mexican Indians to Catholicism and to introduce European methods of farming as a way to establish claims to the new lands. These missionaries had good intentions. They also brought many European diseases that naturally infected these natives. One epidemic killed over 3,000 Indians. The natives were infuriated, and many times they would overtake these missionaries by burning their missions to the ground and slaughtering hundreds of missionaries and settlers. In 1680, an Indian named Pope killed over 400 Spanish missionaries and drove the few that remained out of that area. From 1690 to 1821, Texas was under Spanish rule. In early 1821, Mexico declared war on Spain to win their independence. In the end, Mexico defeated Spain and declared themselves independent from Spanish rule. In 1824, the Mexican government enacted the General Colonization Law. This law allowed anyone of any country to colonize Mexican Texas. Mexico wanted people to colonize Texas for many reasons. Many of the Americans that colonized Texas were farmers. This would give Mexico a boost in their economy. Another reason was simply for safety purposes. They thought if they had more colonists, it would mean more soldiers, and having more soldiers would increase the chance of defeating invaders. Mexico would also hire impresarios, which would bring new settlers to the Mexican land. This land was attractive to settlers because of its very reasonable price. According to Mary Dotson Wade's book, The Road to San Jacinto, the land averaged only 12 cents an acre. One of the first impresarios was a man by the name of Stephen F. Austin, who settled along the Brazos River in 1822. He brought with him over 300 settlers. Shortly after they settled, tension began to rise between Mexico and the settlers. The Mexican government required all settlers to convert to the Roman Catholic religion. Even though they said they expected them to convert, they never provided services such as Mass. Settlers were also required to pay extremely high taxes but receive no services in return. One of the main services that Mexico lacked was protection from the Indians. Mexican law prohibited slavery, but many settlers brought slaves with them. Many colonists defied the government and illegally kept slaves. They were also expected to speak Spanish. This outraged many immigrants because they wanted to use their native tongue. These tensions were the basis for the Texas Revolution. When Santa Anna became president of Mexico, he was intolerant of the Texas Rebellion. He immediately sent Mexican soldiers to Texas to enforce these laws. These soldiers were ordered to use as much force as necessary to carry out the laws. The Texans became very angry with this, and many settlers were fearful for their lives, and left their homes and fled to uninhabited parts of Texas where Santa Anna's soldiers would not disturb them. This became known as the Runaway Scrape. The settlers finally realized that independence needed to be their goal. Sam Houston made sure that before there was an outright war, the Texas Declaration of Independence would need to be signed. If not, he knew that Texas would not gain its independence from Mexico. A convention was called for this purpose to be held in Washington on the Brazos. Sam Houston had stationed Colonel William Travis and a contingent of volunteers including Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie at the Alamo to slow the Mexican army down. This delay would give him enough time to prepare his army and have all of the delegates sign the Texas Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence for Mexico was signed by the 54 delegates on March 2, 1836, declaring Texas to be a free and independent republic. James Fannin, a Texian commander, was leading his men to San Antonio to aid in its defense at the request of Travis, but they were not able to get there in time to help and ended up in Goliad at the Presidio La Bahia. With the Mexican army quickly approaching, General Sam Houston ordered Fannin to retreat with his men, about 300 in total, east to Victoria. The retreat was delayed until March 19, 1836. By this time, Fannin had already heard the fate of the men at the Alamo. The retreat was slow, and the rapidly advancing Mexican force of about 700 to 1,000 men overtook them near Coleto Creek in present-day Goliad County, where a battle took place on March 19th through 20th. Fannin saw the futility of continuing the battle against the much larger force and surrendered his men, who were taken back to the Presidio La Bahia as prisoners. The Mexicans wanted clemency for the Texan prisoners, however Santa Anna ordered their execution. The unarmed men were marched away from the Presidio on March 27th and were shot by their captors. Fannin, who had been wounded in the Battle of Coleto Creek, was executed separately at the Presidio. The only hope remaining for Texas independence now lay with Sam Houston's ragtag contingent, which were retreating to the east while being pursued by the larger Mexican army. The famous battle cry, "Remember the Alamo" and "Remember Goliad," were on the lips of the Texians, who thought General Houston was a coward for retreating. However, Houston was waiting for the right time and circumstances, which brings us back to the eve of the Battle of San Jacinto. On the morning of April 20th, 1836, both armies arrived in what is now Harris County, Texas. The two armies were camped very close together, and all that day there were small skirmishes, but not a direct battle. The next day, on April 21st, Sam Houston had something up his sleeve. He knew that if he did not attack in the morning, Santa Anna would think that he was not going to attack on that day. In the late afternoon at approximately 4:30 to 5 p.m., Sam Houston led his men into the Mexican camp. As they opened fire upon the Mexicans, they chanted, "Remember the Alamo! Remember Goliad!" The Texians had caught the Mexican army by surprise, and the battle had only lasted 18 minutes. Although short, the Texians had killed 700 Mexican soldiers, wounded 208, and taken 730 prisoners. The Texian army had only lost 9 men and had a mere 30 wounded. The rest of the day, the Texian soldiers searched the grounds for runaways. While searching, they found a Mexican man dressed as a private. Whilst the search party returned with him, they knew it was Santa Anna because the prisoners called him El Presidente, El Presidente. Many of the Texans demanded to see Santa Anna hanged, but Sam Houston refused, knowing that he needed him to approve the Declaration of Independence. Sam Houston was very wise, and although under pressure, he persisted because he knew that if he delayed the confrontation with Santa Anna and waited, they would have a better chance of becoming independent. His leadership ensured that the Mexican army was delayed sufficiently at the Alamo to prepare his men for the battle, that the delegates to the convention at Washington on the Brazos had time to prepare the Declaration of Independence, and that the eventual Battle of San Jacinto was fought and won on his terms, with minimal casualties. The legacy he left was very important. The United States would likely be very different today, with Texas and other southwestern states still a part of Mexico, without his leadership.
You see by the dawn's early light what so proud